And he's agreed to a trade framework with the European Union, announcing tariffs at 15% on European imports rather than the initial threat of 30%.
We have a deal. We have a trade deal between the two largest economies in the world. It's 15% tariffs across the board, all inclusive.
Donald Trump just did it again. Signed a bold, camera-ready trade deal with the European Union, complete with tariff threats, billion-dollar energy terms, and a press conference designed to humiliate America's closest neighbor, Canada. While headlines across Europe applauded the deal, Ottawa was left staring at a chilling reality. Canada was deliberately cut out of the spotlight. But this time, Canada didn't react with outrage. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney chose silence, strategic silence. What looked like diplomatic neglect may actually be a masterstroke of patience, sovereignty, and long-game diplomacy. This isn't just another snub. It's a calculated move in a high-stakes geopolitical game, one that Carney refuses to play by Trump's rules. As the White House touts America first, Carney is crafting something far more dangerous, a counter-narrative that doesn't rely on the U.S. at all. As Trump's trade machine barrels forward, Canada's measured resistance is gaining international attention, even shocking the EU itself. Behind the silence lies a growing storm, a trade standoff that could redraw economic alliances, strain cross-border industries, and fracture North American unity. This isn't just about trade, it's about power. It's about who gets to shape the future of the continent. And as 2026 approaches, Canada isn't folding. It's rewriting the rules. To understand why Canada's silence is so loud right now, we need to rewind. For decades, Canada and the United States operated under an unspoken rule of economic harmony. Cross-border trade wasn't just routine, it was foundational. With over $2 billion traded daily, the US and Canada built the world's largest bilateral trading relationship. But that delicate balance began to shift the moment Trump returned to the White House. His focus shifted toward flashier deals, those with immediate PR wins, and Canada, once the US's closest economic ally, suddenly found itself pushed to the sidelines. The new EU trade deal wasn't just about the European market, it was a message, one aimed squarely at America's partners like Canada: get in line or get ignored. The deal includes a 15% tariff reduction on key goods and opens massive energy corridors through LNG and renewables, the same corridors Canada has long been trying to negotiate. Trump's decision to skip over Canada wasn't accidental, it was strategic, and Carney knows it. But instead of rushing into a reactive deal, Prime Minister Mark Carney is playing the long game. He's refusing to engage on Trump's terms. While U.S. negotiators hoped Canada would cave under the pressure, scrambling for a spot at the table, Ottawa did the opposite. It went quiet. That silence, however, is part of a deeper strategy. Carney's approach hinges on one principle: no deal is better than a bad deal. That phrase has become a quiet mantra in Ottawa's halls of power. Carney isn't just buying time, he's building leverage. By withholding quick concessions, Canada is betting that the U.S., despite its loud moves, still depends heavily on stable Canadian exports in industries like auto parts, aluminum, energy, and food. Cutting those ties in a knee-jerk response to Trump's bravado would hurt Canada, but it could cripple key American industries, especially in Midwestern states vital to the 2026 election map. And let's not forget what's around the corner: the USMCA review in 2026. This is the real battlefield. That's when the deal that underpins all North American trade can be reopened or even dismantled, and Carney is clearly positioning Canada to walk into that review from a place of strength, not weakness. Meanwhile, Trump's dismissiveness is creating diplomatic openings. In a recent speech, he waved off concerns about Canada, calling the nation a friendly but soft player in trade. That quote exploded across Canadian media, but instead of fighting back publicly, Carney let the comment hang in the air and then quietly began courting international sympathy. EU officials, surprised by the tone of Trump's remarks, have privately expressed discomfort with how Canada was treated. Even Germany's trade envoy reportedly asked if Canada was being frozen out for political theater. This global discomfort is precisely what Carney is leveraging. While the US barrels ahead with headline-grabbing tariffs and deals, Canada is presenting itself as the reasonable, stable, and overlooked partner. That contrast is powerful. It turns Canada into the victim of unjust trade aggression, and in geopolitics, victimhood can be a weapon. Inside Canada, premiers like Doug Ford of Ontario and François Legault of Quebec are publicly backing Carney's wait-and-watch strategy. And here's where the stakes rise even higher. Ontario and Quebec represent the manufacturing backbone of Canada. Their support isn't just political, it's economic. With Ford in particular, there's quiet discussion of diversifying markets entirely, including increasing ties with China. This is the part that should make Washington nervous. If Canada seriously begins exploring deeper trade with China, especially on energy and raw materials, the US could find itself boxed out of its own backyard. That's not just symbolic, it's strategically catastrophic. And Carney knows how to use this fear. In briefings with allies and trade ministers, he's framed the pivot to China not as a threat, but as an unfortunate plan B if the US continues down the path of bullying economics. This narrative puts the blame squarely on Trump while positioning Canada as forced into tough decisions. Behind the scenes, Canada is also tightening ties with Japan, South Korea, and even ASEAN nations, exploring trade routes that bypass traditional US corridors. This diversification isn't new, but it's accelerating. And the message to the US is clear: we have options. Meanwhile, US businesses are starting to feel uneasy. The National Association of Manufacturers recently warned that losing seamless access to Canadian components could drive up costs by 12 to 18% in some sectors. In Michigan, where auto parts flow hourly across the Detroit-Windsor border, even a minor disruption could cost thousands of jobs within weeks. Canada knows this, and it's waiting. Carney's brilliance lies in his ability to look weak while holding powerful cards. Trump may have sidelined Canada for now, but Carney is setting the stage for a comeback that will force Washington to reconsider its entire North American posture. And if that comeback involves stronger Asia ties, the US may soon discover that its most loyal neighbor is no longer waiting to be invited to the table. It's building its own. As Trump continues to dominate headlines with bold tariff policies and fast-tracked agreements, the situation is quietly transforming behind the scenes. Canada's decision to delay, to not take the bait, has given it something far more valuable than a rushed deal. It has bought narrative control. And in modern geopolitics, controlling the story can be more powerful than controlling the trade routes themselves.
The media cycle in both the US and Canada has slowly begun shifting focus. Where once Canada's absence was seen as weakness, it's now being reframed as deliberate strategic positioning. Editorial boards in Ottawa, Toronto, and even London are beginning to question whether Canada's slow game might prove more effective than Trump's blitz-style deals. The Washington Post recently ran a piece titled, "Has Trump Pushed Canada Too Far?" A headline that would have seemed unthinkable just months ago. But that's exactly what Carney wants: space for doubt. Doubt within American industry, doubt within Congress, doubt even among US allies. While Trump flaunts short-term wins, Carney is crafting long-term influence. This dynamic is becoming increasingly clear as the 2026 USMCA review approaches, a moment that could shake the entire foundation of North American trade if not handled carefully. What Canada is aiming for is not just better terms, it's a rebalancing of power. The original NAFTA and now USMCA were structured in a way that heavily favored US industrial might, but times have changed. Canada's resource infrastructure, its tech sector, and its position as a trusted middle power in the global order all give it bargaining power that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. With China and the EU both courting Ottawa for expanded energy and mining partnerships, Carney sees this as a rare moment to break from dependency. This is where the pivot to China becomes more than theoretical. In late June, a quiet but significant meeting took place between Canadian trade officials and Chinese energy executives in Vancouver. While it wasn't formally publicized, leaks confirmed discussions around LNG supply chains, rare earth exports, and yuan-settled contracts, all topics that would have been unthinkable in a pre-2020 context. The shift is subtle, but unmistakable. Doug Ford's government has begun reviewing long-term export models that don't center on U.S. destinations. If Ontario begins reducing its reliance on American manufacturing ecosystems, especially auto and aerospace, that creates structural vulnerabilities for U.S. states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. These aren't just any states, they're electoral battlegrounds, and any economic instability there could tip the scales in the next presidential race. Carney's team is playing this angle with precision. By keeping negotiations slow and opaque, they're letting U.S. governors, senators, and lobby groups feel the anxiety grow. The idea is simple: make American industry miss Canada. Make them pressure the White House. Already several agricultural lobbyists in the Midwest are pushing back against Trump's harsh stance, worried about losing Canadian buyers and suppliers. This internal pressure could eventually force Trump to return to the table, not with demands, but with concessions. Meanwhile, Canada is expanding diplomatic outreach beyond economics. Cultural and military cooperation discussions have increased with France, Germany, and Japan. This signals that Ottawa is broadening alliances, not as a snub to the U.S., but as a hedge against instability. The more integrated Canada becomes with global powers, the less dependent it is on Washington's mood swings. And there's another layer: the tech race. Canada's AI and quantum research sectors are booming, especially in Toronto and Montreal. Both China and the EU have expressed interest in deepening collaboration, offering funding and market access. If Carney allows these partnerships to develop outside the U.S. sphere, the geopolitical implications could be massive. The U.S. risks losing not just a trade partner, but a tech and resource ally, at a time when the global AI arms race is intensifying. Internally, Carney is tightening control. His cabinet has unified behind the long-game strategy, despite pressure from export-heavy industries. Provincial leaders have been briefed on potential fallout and mitigation strategies. There's a rare political consensus building, across parties and provinces, that Canada must not fold. The economic pain of losing short-term U.S. access is real, but the cost of strategic submission would be far greater. Meanwhile, the American side is starting to show cracks. Trump's focus on flashy victories may be weakening his long-term leverage. Even Mexico, another USMCA member, has reportedly held informal discussions with Canadian officials about strengthening bilateral trade if the U.S. becomes too erratic. That's a nightmare scenario for Washington, its neighbors working together to go around it. And this brings us to the crux of the issue. Trump's tariffs aren't just about economics, they're about control. But if that control leads to isolation, then the tariffs become a self-inflicted wound. Canada's strategy, slow, deliberate, and underplayed, is making that wound deeper by the day. With the 2026 review inching closer, Carney has positioned himself not as a reactive leader, but as a chess player 4 moves ahead. Trump may have shocked the EU with his latest deal, but Carney has shocked the geopolitical world with something far more dangerous: restraint. That restraint is reshaping alliances, redirecting trade, and slowly, methodically, eroding U.S. dominance over the North American economic sphere. As the stakes rise, the world is watching. Not because Canada shouted back, but because it refused to speak until it mattered most. So, as the world watches Trump dominate headlines with big deals and bigger threats, Canada is making a different kind of statement, one grounded in silence, strategy, and sovereignty. Prime Minister Mark Carney's refusal to bend under pressure isn't just a domestic political play, it's a global signal. Canada will not be boxed into unfair terms or rushed into reactive decisions. By holding the line, Carney is rewriting the rules of North American trade diplomacy and forcing the U.S. to confront the consequences of its own aggressive posture. The irony? The very tariffs meant to assert dominance may end up fracturing America's closest alliances, pushing Canada closer to China and weakening the very trade relationships that once made North America the envy of the global economy. And with 2026 looming, the cost of strategic arrogance may be higher than anyone in Washington is prepared to admit. So, what do you think? Is Canada's slow burn resistance the smartest geopolitical move of the decade, or a dangerous game with uncertain rewards? Should the U.S. rethink its strategy before it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a breakdown like this. And if you're still curious about how Canada is silently dismantling US influence in energy, watch the next video showing right now on your screen.